It's story time with your creepy Uncle Jizzo. Ooh, yeah. It's your old pal Jizzo here. Just recharging my chakras for this next installment of Jizzo'S Storytime. And yes, it'll be about drugs again. This next story comes from my book, All the Devils, available here, FYI. And this one is affectionately called Death. Now, this next story took place a few years after high school. I graduated high school and moved on to what I like to call extended high school, Pierce Junior College in Woodland Hills. Now, I was the only student to attend for 3.5 years to a 2-year college and achieve absolutely 0 degrees. Junior college was tailor-made for people like me who didn't want their adolescence to end, and more importantly, had no fucking clue what they wanted to do or what they wanted to be. I made friends with a guy at college, a kindred spirit. He had just been discharged from the Army, and he too had no clue what to do with the rest of his life. But he did have a guitar, and so we spent many a lunch together singing Wish You Were Here and getting stoned. We talked about astral projection, drugs, Ernesto the Brujo, and all things surreal and spaced out. Now, this story revolves around the peyote buttons that he gave me, my subsequent peyote trip, and it is affectionately called Death. Button. Who's got the button? I got the magic buttons one day when I went to his house for a visit. He gave me the peyote cactus buttons in a brown paper bag, and he gave me instructions on how to take them and what would happen when I did take them. The next morning was set. Now, I had made sure my day's schedule was completely open for any tricks drugs were going to pull on me. I didn't know what I was expecting when I opened the brown paper bag and poured out the magic cacti. Would I too see visions? Would I fly? Would I crash? Back then, hallucinogenic drugs were a gateway for young minds, a learning tool. You know what? Today, they just scare the shit out of me. I took each cactus button and carefully removed the woolly fluff that was in the center. That was important because apparently the fluff was the stuff that made you throw up. So poof, goodbye fluff. So I popped the first button in my mouth and I started to chew it. It had the consistency of dried tofu and was honestly the worst tasting thing I had ever eaten in my life. This must be what eating dried cat shit was like, I thought. Crunchy, foul, shitty tasting shit. I almost gagged several times trying to keep the first one down, and I winced when I saw the other 6 were lying there. Here you go, buddy. Behold the power of 7. The 7 samurai, the 7 rings of power, the 7 pillars of wisdom. Eventually, I ate all 7 buttons and I sat back on the bed and I relaxed. My tongue scratched the roof of my mouth and it sounded like an old piece of cardboard. I got a notebook and I put it next to me on the bed in anticipation of receiving the book of the law. I don't know. I was waiting for something. I was waiting for the wisdom to enter me, a sign, a light, something. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. Time passed. I had one of those old Kit Kat clocks hanging on the wall, and I watched its eyes move from right to left. Click, 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 click. Click, click went the eyes. Click, click went the tail. Back and forth like a pendulum, like a drum. After about half an hour, my stomach began to churn and then signal the next phase of this drug-induced experiment. I rushed to the bathroom, got down on my knees, and I let it all go. up it came, salsa verde with a side of bile, all green and stringy and vile. I heaved it up until all that was left was a bit of green foam on my mouth, like the remnants of a shamrock shake. And then it began. I was high. I knew something was going on, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I picked up the notepad next to me and I began to write. Out came a torrent of weird shit. Stuff about crying Indian children. Oh, the starving children. Look at their faces. Why doesn't someone help the poor fucking children? I wrote and I wrote. It was like one of those sappy UNICEF commercials, like one of those Sarah McLachlan doggy commercials, you know what I mean? All melodramatic and sappy. Why won't someone help these poor starving children? The wailing of the oppressed. It hurt my ears and sent me shaking to my core. The pen just scribbled like automatic writing as I stood there, an observer like a disembodied spirit. When I finished writing, I looked at my 10-page manifesto. Writing it all down seems to have purged me of all my guilt. I was no longer this bourgeois capitalist pig American ignoring the plight of the poor. I'd somehow atoned for my middle-class Irish American Caucasian San Fernando Valley lifestyle. Whew, there you go, complete absolution. So I put the notepad down and I thought, you know what? Maybe it was a good time to groove to some music. I had a quadraphonic stereo and an 8-track tape player, so I picked out a tape, I turned the stereo on, I put the tape in, I pushed play, and all of a sudden I heard this. The tape sounded fucked up. It sounded garbled. It sounded like this. So I don't know, it sounded like the tape was twisted. So I panicked and I hurriedly pulled out the tape, but when I pulled it out, the tape looked normal. No twists, no breakage. So I grabbed another 8-track tape and I pushed it in. It happened again. I pulled out the tape and then it dawned on me that it wasn't the tape that was fucked up. It was me. Auditory hallucinations. Fucking with the ears. This wasn't like LSD or mushrooms. This was something completely different. My ears were fucked up. Hence the title of this story, Deaf. I sat back on my bed, flummoxed. What could I do? Music was out. So what could I do with all this pent-up peyote trippiness? My mom solved that problem when she opened up my bedroom door and in her best exorcist voice croaked, "Breakfast is ready."
You know what she did? Your c***ing daughter.
Yeah! When I say she was the exorcist, I mean she literally sounded like the exorcist. The deep, raspy exorcist voice. She was little Reagan, tied to the bed and belching vomit. She was the devil. She was the great Lord Pazuzu himself. Deep and dark and fearful, but to my eyes, still looking like my mother. It was freaked. To be honest, I was a bit famished, having just puked my guts out 30 minutes before. So I went out and I joined my exorcist family for exorcist breakfast. Now the next half hour remains with me, a trip down the light fantastique. Mother, father, and little brother all yakking and talking in full exorcist mode, gesticulating with their arms, hailing Satan, a breakfast table full of demons. Mommy exorcist telling us we had to clean our rooms after breakfast. Daddy exorcist wanted steak for dinner. Little brother exorcist just yakking incoherently, an exorcist without a cause. Now, the wall opposite me had a full-length mirror, and as I listened to them croak devilishly, I caught myself staring in the mirror for any sign that I looked fucked up. Now, apparently, peyote doesn't work like that. My eyes weren't red and my pupils weren't dilated, so I was okay. I smiled and I nodded at them, and I ate my exorcist eggs and toast while the demons jabbered and sang. I was safe. When breakfast was over, I went out into the backyard to get away from all this. It was a typical California day, hot and very quiet. My mother was growing strawberries on a raised terrace out in the back. And so I walked over and I picked one. Now this, I thought, was a perfect strawberry. I must have stared at it for 10 minutes, marveling at all its redness, the tiny little dots that covered its surface, the indescribable psychedelic strawberryness of it all. I couldn't eat it, f that. I wanted to preserve it for all time. I wanted to put it in its own strawberry museum so the whole world could see what I saw. This is the nature of hallucinogenic drugs, people. I wanted to open a strawberry museum. Got it? At some point, I detached myself from the weirdo world of strawberries and decided I needed to go buy some weed. I knew a buddy that was selling, so I hopped in my old Volkswagen Baja Bug, remember Baja Bugs? And drove off to see him. Now, if you've ever had a Baja Bug Volkswagen, you know that whenever you drove it, the car sounded like the whole thing was going to fly apart at any moment. Now, as I drove the car, the drug seemed to enhance my hearing. And all of a sudden, the Baja Bug was alive. It was like Herbie. The chassis rose and fell like a rusty violin. The steering wheel sounded like an oboe when I turned. And when I slammed on the brakes, it sounded like the flight of the Valkyries. It was so distracting that I could barely drive. So when I got to my friend's house, he ushered me in and I followed him to his bedroom. There was some other guy in there. We nodded to each other like fellow dopers do, and the business began. My friend took it upon himself to put on a record. It was Day of the Eagle by Robin Trower. Anyway, when he did that, I watched as he and the other guy started, slowly but surely, to assume the position of professional air guitar players. It was weird. It was almost like they were in tune with the record. A pause, and then when the main riff kicked in, they both started playing it perfectly, in tandem, in fucking tandem, like a Whitesnake video. Dual air guitars, rhythms, solos, the whole thing. It seemed like the rock gods were giving me a little show, a private audience that only I could see. So I sat down and I watched. At first, I just wanted to get my pot and get the fuck out of there. But instead, I sat down on the bed and I watched the private concert. I watched, and you know what? I applauded when it finished. Bravo! Bravo! Great job, guys. Thanks again, drugs. Next stop on my little trippy trip was my friend Lenny's house. Now, he and his girlfriend lived down the block on Reseda Boulevard. He was an on-again, off-again bandmate of mine, but unlike me, did not share my love of jumping through the looking glass. When I walked in, they both knew something was up. The radar started spinning. I turned on their stereo and we all sat down. And then a strange thing happened. The stereo started playing Led Zeppelin's Whole Lotta Love. We were all listening. When they got to that long instrumental break, the radio DJ, live on the air, switched the turntables from Whole Lotta Love to Queen's Get Down, Make Love, and started playing that one. He must have thought that was pretty cool, but it just freaked me the f*** out. I looked at Lenny. Are you doing this? Am I doing what? He answered. This, I said, this. Are you doing this? Lenny and his girlfriend looked at me pretty strangely, and I knew the jig was up. They didn't look at me in a nice way anymore, more like, is he gonna pick up a knife and start stabbing us kind of way. They actually backed away from me like I was John Wayne Gacy in full clown drag. It's too bad. I wanted to say, it's only the drugs, but I didn't. They wouldn't understand. They wouldn't understand. So I decided to hightail it out of there and go home. The world apparently was not ready for my wisdom. The world was an unsympathetic place full of two-dimensional people living two-dimensional lives. No one wanted to push the boundaries anymore like me. No one wanted to stick their hands in the wood chipper. By that time, I don't know, the trip was wearing off. I saw no vistas. I saw no giant bugs. I didn't become a bug like Gregor Samsa in that Kafka story. After the trip was over, I was still a non-adult. I didn't know whether I wanted to major in English or in music. Now, did I want to be a writer or a rock star? Let me see. Do book writers get laid? Probably not. They tend to hermit themselves away in some garage, like Dylan Thomas, struggling, agonizing over every sentence. Then they drink themselves to death and die. Rock stars seemed the better choice. Lots of drugs, lots of girls, hot and cold running glory. That's the ticket. So the next day, I went back to Pierce Junior College and I trudged up that long, winding staircase to the top of the mountain where the music department was, and I made my decision.